or director of. Okay. Let me start over. Hi, this is Jeff Leiker. I'm happy to join you virtually at your conference. I'm particularly pleased to be talking to human resource professionals. I usually talk to people who are experts in lean or continuous improvement or quality. But as I'm going to be talking about, what the Toyota Way really is about is respect for people and continuous improvement. And the role of the human resource professional at Toyota is to respect and develop people. It's not simply paperwork to make sure people get paid and get the right benefits. The human resource professional is actually well-trained in problem solving in the Toyota production system, and they're able to develop people to be exceptional thinkers and problem solvers and learners. I'll be giving a presentation talking about the Toyota Way and also leadership. And I'm going to start by sharing my presentation. Okay, so you really can't talk about the Toyota Way without talking about leadership. The role of a leader at Toyota is actually to be a coach and to develop people, not simply to discipline and command and control. I'll be talking about the new version of the Toyota Way that was just translated into Slovenian, but also I'll be referring to the Toyota Way to lean leadership and a model of how Toyota develops leaders, as well as this concept called Toyota Kata by Mike Rother. He was one of my former students, and he noticed that what Toyota leaders are really coaching in the people who report to them is a way of solving problems based on scientific thinking. And I'll be talking about what we mean by scientific thinking and what we mean by kata. And then I also want to point out that we have a graphic novel, a comic book. It's about 60 pages that goes through, in the case of a mail order company, so not an auto plant, but a company that mails out artisanal gourmet food throughout the United States that we've worked with. They're using this idea of kata to develop their people. The motto for the Toyota Way has what I call 4 Ps. The first P is philosophy, and Toyota is very much a company that thinks long-term in terms of their strategy for their product. For example, how they balance hybrid vehicles, gas vehicles, electric vehicles. That's all being worked out, thinking about the environment over the next 30 years. And then they have visions for 10 years out, detailed 5-year plans, 3-year plans, and every year they have what I'll talk about as policy deployment to deploy their goals from top to bottom. They think in terms of systems. So the Toyota production system is a system, and the Toyota Way is a system. And by system, I mean all the parts relate to each other. And if you simply pull out one section, it won't have the same sort of impact that it has at Toyota. What is most known among lean practitioners is what I call the process P, which is where the lean tools live, tools like just-in-time and standardized work and visual management and 5S. Those are all tools. And the way I refer to them in the Toyota Way is that they're part of a struggle by Toyota to flow value without interruption to the customer. Whatever your process is, whether you're developing software or you're making cars, you want to flow value to the customer without interruption. And any interruption, whether it's downtime of equipment, whether we're waiting for information, whether we make a defect, all these wastes will cause the timeline to be longer. It'll take longer to serve the customer, and you won't serve the customer as well or as efficiently. So what Toyota is really trying to do with these lean tools is flow value to the customer, and they realize that's always a struggle because there's always things every day that go wrong. So they have to solve those problems very quickly as they occur. And the way they solve those problems is they don't depend, at least these days, they don't depend on artificial intelligence or computers to do the thinking for them. They depend upon people who are respected, challenged, and grown to achieve really difficult, challenging goals. So Toyota doesn't set simple, incremental goals. They set big, challenging goals for their leaders, and they expect their leaders to know how to achieve those goals. And they do it through problem solving. And I call that working scientifically toward a challenge. And I put in the center of the model scientific thinking. So what do we mean by that? I mentioned Mike Rother wrote Toyota Kata, one of my former students, and he has 3 simple definitions of practical scientific thinking, not what a PhD does, but what ordinary people do at work. And one thing he would like to see is that we all acknowledge that we don't know everything, that there are limits to what we know, and there are particularly limits to our ability to predict the future. We can explain the past, maybe okay, but when it comes to predicting the future, we're really not very good. So when we come up with a solution, the solution is about the future, and we should acknowledge there's limits to what we know about how this journey is going to go as we try to get to our goal. And we're going to assume that the best way to find out what works and what doesn't work is to try it, to act, to test your ideas in reality at the workplace, in our real processes. So this goes beyond theorizing. The theorizing can create a idea that you test, a hypothesis, but then you have to run the experiment and appreciate that when you run the experiment, you might be wrong. There may be a gap between what you expect to happen and what happens. And when you miss your guess, you have an opportunity to learn. I taught a graduate course in lean thinking using this model of scientific thinking as the framework for the course. And the worst thing that would happen, I had students working on projects and companies. The worst thing would happen is that every one of their experiments proved to be successful because they weren't learning anything. They were just learning that they're always right. So, and then when that happened, I knew they weren't really challenging themselves. So they had to increase the challenge, the target. And then this guy Prakar Pandey, I don't know a lot about him, but I loved this idea that the best single character definition of scientific thinking is a question mark. We don't know, we're curious, we want to find out. I mentioned the second P, which I'm not going to spend much time on, the lean tools, but let me just mention that the first concept, principle 2, is that you want to flow value to the customer continuously without interruption, without waste. You want the customer, the end customer, as well as the next customer who you're directly serving in your company, say, to pull what they need when they need it from you. And there's various ways to level out the workload so we don't get big peaks and valleys where we're overwhelming people and then we're not utilizing them correctly. So Toyota works hard to level the workload. One way they level the workload is by reducing variation, by having standard processes like standardized work for everybody in the company that will be applied to the routine parts of your job, which are very routine on an assembly line, less routine for management, but there's always some part of your job that's routine and can be standardized, which reduces variation, which creates a more level schedule of work. They design and build in quality. They don't want to inspect it in. They rely heavily during the workday on visual control, which means I want to be able to see, am I reaching my target? Am I not reaching my target? What's the gap? Are we in control? Are we out of control? You want to visually see the gap. And that can be done using digital tools, but Toyota relies quite heavily on paper tools for visual control, like boards that are used for daily meetings, like we see in this picture of a daily huddle, where we're looking at how we're doing on our key performance indicators compared to what we should be doing, what's red, what's yellow, what's green. And we're also looking at describing the problem-solving projects we're doing to improve our processes. Toyota views technology as important. It's key to their company. They have computers everywhere, lots of computers in the car itself, but they view technology in the workplace to support people in processes, not to do the thinking for people and not to replace people. So it's not simply an efficiency measure, and they don't assume the technology is smarter than people. They assume people are smarter than the technology, but the technology can assist, aid, provide useful information if it's the right information in the right amount at the right time. So I'm going to focus primarily on the people and problem solving. And for people, I mentioned problem solving a number of times. And the most important skill for Toyota that makes the difference between an exceptional person and an ordinary person is the ability to solve problems. And when we think of problem solving, sometimes we think of experts, like you have engineers, you have experts on the environment, you have experts, you have human resource experts on policies and procedures and on safety. So for experts, there's a whole body of knowledge that you somehow master. Some of it maybe is in school, some of it's at the company, but supposedly you have a whole body of knowledge that you're applying to solve problems. And you have an advantage over people that don't have that training. So for an expert, they're going to analyze the situation. They're going to develop a solution that they think will work and they feel pretty confident about. Then they want to implement it as quickly as possible, getting it right. And then they want to check to make sure that they got it right. And then they want to control the situation so that, for example, so the safety intervention, you want the person to be properly using the safety tools or protective equipment or whatever it is. So make sure people follow the plan. So this is one loop of what Toyota got from Dr. Deming and called it plan, do, check, act. So one, or plan, do, study, act. So it's one loop. And the assumption is that the expert knows a lot in the plan stage. And they're basically implementing what they know, checking to be sure they're right, and then controlling to make sure that the new system is followed. This is what you can think of as predictive problem solving, where we have a high degree of certainty that we can correctly diagnose the problem and we have the right solution. If you go to a doctor and they say that you have a flu, you expect that they probably are right and they have the proper treatment for a flu. And you don't want them asking you, what do you think you have? What do you think you should do? There's a different type of problem solving, which is really what Toyota is training people on, that you can think of as adaptive problem solving. That's for situations where we don't know, where we know there's a problem. We know, for example, there's a defect that occurred, but we don't know why the defect occurred, where it originated, and we don't know how to solve it. And a lot of the problems we face during every day at work are more adaptive problem solving. And for these kinds of problems, the people at the front line actually could be helpful. They understood the condition in which the machine broke down, and they know what it smells like and sounds like. They're using their senses, and they have a great deal of information and intuition about how to get the machine running again. For this kind of problem solving, our plan leads not to solutions, but to predictions. This is what I think might work. And then the do is actually running the experiment to test our idea. The check stage, we're collecting facts and data to learn, we're gathering evidence. And then in the act stage, we're actually evaluating the evidence and asking the question, what have I learned from this? And then based on that, we're likely to need to run a few experiments to reach the goal. So that will lead to our next prediction, our next action, more evidence. And then the PDCA becomes not just one big loop of implementing a known solution, but a lot of small loops of learning step by step. And that's the model that Mike Ruther's talking about in Toyota. The problem is that we really like predictive problem solving, and we're not too crazy about adaptive problem solving. We naturally desire certainty and fast solutions. We want it to work the first time right. We prefer to do what has worked for us before, that is within our comfort zone. And we assume we know things even when we do not. There was a great book by Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner, called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he contrasts what he calls system one to system two. System one is fast thinking, for example, would be predictive problem solving, where we're confident we know, and it tends to be intuitive based on past experience, and we are confident in our impressions about what the problem is, and also our sense of what should be done, and we want to just do it fast and get it done. Slow thinking, on the other hand, we would ask the question, do we really know what the problem is? How can we analyze this problem to really understand the root cause? What are some ideas we have that might be countermeasures to this problem? Which one do we want to test first? This is slow, rational, deliberate, systematic, and it's more likely to result in logical conclusions, but it takes effort. And what Daniel Kahneman learns is that people are really not wired to want to expend a lot of mental effort. We like it when we have little mental effort. And there's a reason for that, and it has to do with evolution and genetics. Our brains have barely evolved since these days where we're living in the jungle and it was kill or be killed. In this environment, fast thinking always wins. And slow thinking will get you killed, or at least you'll go home hungry. So these people were more likely, who had brains that were wired for fast thinking, were more likely to win and make more babies and pass on the genes than slow thinkers were more likely to die out. So given that Toyota wants people to be slow thinkers, systematic, logical, collecting data, going and observing the actual process, finding the root cause, given that they want us to do things that we're not naturally good at, then as a leader, the first step is you need to be developed. So when you're hired into Toyota, they do a lot. Like, for example, if you're an engineer, the first 2 years is almost all just development and teaching. And for example, you go out and spend 3 months trying to sell cars. You'll spend 3 months in a factory working on a line. You'll be given a freshman project where you design some simple thing, but you have a coach who's mentoring you, who's giving you feedback. But the important thing is that Toyota wants to hire people or select people who have potential to be leaders, who are committed to their own self-development. So Toyota doesn't believe that I can force you to develop yourself, or that that's a good thing if I want you to be a leader. They want you to be self-motivated, and they want you to be reaching out to learn. So you're looking up to and you're anxious for the feedback that's coming from your sensei, from your teacher. And so that gives you an opportunity to develop yourself. And then they want you to grow into learning to develop others. Again, giving them feedback, coaching them, not trying to control them. And you want to be coaching people who are like you and who are interested in self-development. And self-development and coaching others go hand in hand. You're doing that throughout your whole life as a leader. So given that you have somebody who has a lot of potential, they want to develop themselves, they're eager to learn, but their natural tendency is fast thinking, predictive problem solving. They think they know things they don't. How can you change that thinking? And what Mike Rother did was to reach into books about the martial arts, where people learn incredible skills in karate or whatever the martial art is you learn. And they do things with their body that seem impossible, like breaking bricks. And how do these people learn that skill? And the answer is that the teacher doesn't break a brick in front of you and say, now you try. You'd break your hand. But rather, what the teacher has done is broken down the complex physical skills into small, individual, tiny skills called kata. and then you master each kata. If you've ever been exposed to The Karate Kid, there are several movies. There's a new movie, Cobra Kai, a new series on that you can stream. They talk about kata. So in the original movie, The Karate Kid, the teacher is making him wax his car, and the kid's going nuts, saying, "Why am I waxing your car for free? I'm supposed to be learning karate." And as he's using both his hands and waxing the car, he's actually doing a kata. And he's learning a skill, which later the teacher then shows him as actual defensive skill. But so the important thing with the kata is that you practice it repeatedly, you get feedback on what you're doing wrong, so you're correcting yourself until finally you get to the point where you mastered that one kata. Then the teacher will give you the next kata and the next kata. If you've taken music lessons, there's kata for violin, there's kata for piano, and they break down the complex skill into little pieces. So what Mike did was to say, what are the kata for learning how to think scientifically? He said, first, I need to have something to teach. What is my model? What am I trying to teach? And then for each step of this process, what are some things you could practice to get good at this? And the first step he's noticed among the Toyota experts in, for example, the Toyota production system, was that they always start with a direction or challenge. So they will give the student a challenge. For example, here's a process. We have 10 people working in it. Your challenge is to do the same work with 5 people without investing in new technology. So the student's like, okay, I don't even know how to do that, but if you say so. And then the teacher doesn't give answers, but rather says, now I want you to go and observe and try to understand what are some of the wastes. Why is it that they need 5-10 people? And just start. And then the student grasps the current condition and observes, and the teacher's giving feedback on whether they've observed enough, whether they should go back and look some more. And then the teacher will ask, what do you think you should work on first? And they might say, well, I noticed a lot of walking. And the teacher will say, good. What's your target for walking? My target for walking is to eliminate 80% of the walking in the next week. Great, let's get started. What do you think you should try first? And then the student's in an experimenting mode. And this becomes iterative learning. So it starts with a big challenge that seems impossible. Then you go and see, understand the current condition. Then you break down the problem into smaller pieces. And then you experiment your way to that first target. Then you set your next target, you experiment your way to this next target. And our experience is at some point you'll reach the challenge and you won't even realize how you did it, because you did all these little things that all you learn from the failures. You succeeded in some cases, and you're getting closer and closer to the challenge, and at some point you're there. So this is the model. Again, this is just a model. And it turns out that if I explain the model to you and say, go do it, you're not going to be able to do it. I mean, it might make sense, but there's a lot of detail, a lot of skills you have to learn for each of these steps. And if I simply tell you stuff, just like if I were to teach you golf and I were to give a lecture about golf and say, go hit balls, you wouldn't be able to do any of the things that I talked about. So again, through kata in the martial arts, you develop tiny habits through practice. In this case, we're talking about thinking habits, not physical habits. And for each of these steps, Mike Rother in the Toyota Kata Practice Guide has kata. He explains how to practice this step, which I won't go into. As you develop yourself, you're expected at Toyota to then be a leader and coach and develop others, which is a different set of skills. And Mike Rother also developed kata for coaching, and he developed what he calls the learner's storyboard. And this is structured just like the 4 steps of the improvement kata model, where you have a process you're focusing on, a challenge, you look at the current condition, you develop target conditions, you experiment and write down the results on the experimenting record. And every day you meet with your coach, ideally every day, for 10 to 20 minutes. Sometimes it might be a little bit shorter, sometimes a little bit longer. And what the coach does is ask you questions. And Mike Rother developed these coaching questions, which again parallel the model. What's your target condition? What's your current condition? What did you plan as your last step or experiment? What happened? What did you learn from it? And what are you going to try next? So you're asking those questions and you're creating a pattern by repeating those questions and by the student answering the questions. And it turns out that when you ask the questions, you may or may not get a good answer. And if you don't get a good answer, then you have to ask further questions, deepening questions, to focus the students without giving the answer, without telling. And that's described in this novel that we wrote, Thilo Schwartz and I, called Giving Wings to a Team, that goes beyond simply reading the card and so some of the more advanced skills of coaching taught in a novel format as a story. Okay, now we have leaders who have developed some problem-solving capabilities. They've achieved some big challenges. They've learned to work with people effectively. They've learned to listen. They've learned a lot of the skills of leadership. And then they're going to develop the people report to them, and then they're going to develop the people all the way to the shop floor. And at some point, you want to develop a high level of scientific thinking and coaching skill at the front line where the work is being done, so people there can solve their own problems. And I call that supporting daily Kaizen. Toyota organizes not around a bunch of individuals who are controlled, but around small work teams that have a lot of autonomy and a lot of responsibility. So Toyota's found the ideal size for the work team is 4 to 5 people. You can see that in this case, we show the organization chart upside down, which Toyota will often do, to emphasize that only the frontline team members are adding value to the customer. And all the managers and technical specialists are supporting the team members so they can do their job more effectively. Toyota has this other role that a lot of organizations don't have, called a team leader. The team leader is not management. If you looked at a factory, there would be a production worker, and they can do all the jobs in their small team, but they also have potential for leadership, and they've decided to step up and say, I want to learn more. And they've gone through, in Toyota's case, it's about a 16-week training course, learning, among other things like standard work and problem-solving skills and how to audit standard work and how to teach and train new members. And in that 16-week period, they do it and they're coached. And as a team leader, their responsibility is to make sure the team members are present, motivated, doing the work properly, and also finding opportunities to improve how they do the work. The group leader is the first management level, and we refer to the group leader often as like the president of their small business. So the group leader might have 4 team leaders and a total of, say, 25 people. And this is like a small business that happens to be inside of Toyota. They have budget responsibility, they have human resource responsibility, safety, quality, and they have goals for improvement year by year. And they basically run this business. And they're coaching and developing the team leaders who are coaching, developing the team members. The group leaders are coached and developed by assistant managers who usually would have been group leaders, might have been team members, team leaders, and then group leaders, and are now managers, and they have quite advanced skills, and they're coaching and developing the group leader. So a lot of the Kaizen, at least quantitatively, most of it is happening at the front line by the work groups. The big projects, for example, introducing a new model or introducing new advanced equipment, that's having a bigger impact, and that's being done by the technical staff. But the daily improvement, the daily Kaizen, is happening at the front line by the work groups. And the daily management happening at the work groups is necessary for achieving the bigger, what Toyota calls Hoshin management goals. By Hoshin management, Hoshin is referring to a compass, And it's an annual planning process I'll talk about, where they set goals for the year that are big, challenging goals. And these are goals for management. And they're working on these big goals while the frontline workers are reacting to problems they have day by day. And Toyota refers to this as SDCA rather than PDCA. By SDCA, they mean you're starting with a standard. This is what should be happening. This is what happened in this instance. For example, there's a quality defect. So there's a gap between the standard and the actual. And then it's up to the work groups to understand why that gap was there and to experiment and solve the problem. So there's millions of these small little deviations from standard going on all over the company all the time. And in the meantime, management's trying to reach this next level, this big target for quality, for cost, for safety, whatever they're focusing on. But when they make a big change, like introduce, say, a new computer system or a new piece of equipment, their expectation is that they're actually going to generate more variation. They're going to create problems because this is new. And those problems are going to be solved through SDCA, through the front line, solving these small problems every day. So in that sense, the PDCA based on these big goals and the SDCA based on correction of deviations go hand in hand and support each other. Team leaders have their own daily management board. This is a board of information, physical board. It tends to prefer physical boards to computer systems, although behind these numbers are computer systems. And one of the things that Toyota is famous for is the and-on system, where you pull a cord and the line can stop. And every time a worker pulls a cord, that's data that indicates we had a problem, we had a deviation from standard. And that's tracked by computer, and you can look at trends over time. And then the team leader will look at the and-on pulls recently, like yesterday, and will identify the causes and will come up with a chart that shows this is the biggest problem we had yesterday, the most and-on pulls, the biggest impact. And then they select a problem, and then they use what's called this one-by-one problem-solving board. Well, for example, we saw in the first shift, there was a scratch on a bumper, and that happened several times. So they're trying to solve that. That bumper scratch was a hard problem. So in day one, they didn't solve it. In day two, they didn't solve it. It's now day 4. If by the end of today, they don't solve it, it goes to day 5, and then it escalates to the group leader, who has what's called a shop power meeting. And then you can also see that there's a team leader TL problem solving form. This is A3 size paper. And this is a big problem that the team leader is working on trying to solve. And then there's one for the day shift and then one for the evening shift. So the daily meeting that they have with the workers is talking about not just things like safety and quality issues, but also improvements that they're making through this problem-solving process. This is happening every single day for every team leader in the plant. And then the group leader has what's called a power board, and they also have these cards that are moving from day 1, 2, 3, 4. And if they can't solve it at the end of day 4, it escalates to the manager level. And then they also have chronic complex projects that are being done by, in this power meeting would be somebody from maintenance, engineering, quality. So they have support for these daily meetings. These experts can solve these bigger chronic problems. So there's a lot of engagement at the front line, problems being solved every day. And the important thing is that when you have all this problem solving capability, that you focus it so people aren't just randomly just fixing things left and right and can prioritize in some way. And that's done through what's called Hoshin Kanri. And one of my clients looked at this and said, this looks like climbing a big mountain like Mount Everest. where the role of the leader, the Sherpa leader, is not simply to instruct and command and control. They will sometimes if it's a safety concern, but the Sherpa coach is actually behind you and watching you and giving you challenges and tips, but you have to do the work and you have to learn. So the Hoshinkanri process starts with the president of the company, and it goes down to executive vice presidents, and then it goes down to each region of the world, and then it goes down through each function, like for example, in manufacturing, then it goes to each plant. Then within the plant, it goes from the president to the vice presidents, and then managers, and then group leaders. And you're starting from the top and you're developing aligned goals and plans at every level of the company. That happens for over about a 3-month period every year. And then you execute based on those targets. There's a 6-month checkup to see how we're doing and whether we need to make some adjustments. And the purpose is to align goals and plans vertically, but also horizontally across functions. Okay, so this is all good stuff. And I think all of you would like to have well thought out, challenging goals, and people actively every day working toward those big goals to improve their processes, improve how they support the customer. So we run a lean program. Maybe we hire an outside consultant. They come in and they teach us the lean tools. They demonstrate by improving some processes. They get big gains in productivity and quality in those areas that they demonstrate the tools. And we feel really good about that. Then the consultants leave, and then we expect that these improvements will last, they will sustain. Now we're lean. The problem is that there's something you can think of as organizational entropy. Entropy is a law of the universe, like for example, in the chemical world, where everything will degrade and start to decay over time naturally, unless the entropy is arrested by more energy that overcomes the entropy. When the energy is coming from these outside consultants and they leave, they take the energy with them, and entropy will win, and it will look more like this. Now we're slipping. They develop great standardized work. It's not being followed. They developed these daily management boards. We're not updating the numbers. When things got really busy, we stopped having our meetings, and we go back to where we were. One of the Toyota experts said, this is like weeding a garden without pulling the roots. You know, the weeds are going to grow back. So how do you solve this problem? The answer is somewhere you have to find energy to counter this natural tendency to degrade toward what we did in the past, what is easier to do, what takes less thinking. And that positive energy at Toyota comes from these work groups, the group leader, the team leader, the daily management process, the daily improvement process. So in this case, the company has started with an area, and they've spent maybe more time not just implementing the tools, but developing the people so that they could solve their own problems, so that they could improve every day. And then they more gradually, over a longer period of time, will spread this, developing people at every stop. And then they'll leave behind the capability for these groups to continue to improve through daily Kaizen. The challenge is that this is a big cultural change. And what we'd like to do when we change a culture from what it is to what we'd like it to be is run it like predictive problem solving. That is, do some training, give the answers of how you change culture, adjust the reward system perhaps, and then let the culture just change to what we want it to be. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. What culture is really about is what we do on a daily basis, particularly when we're under stress. Things aren't going well, we're getting behind, and we're under pressure, and then we tend to revert to whatever our existing habits are. So what we need to do is not just tell people stuff and create artifacts like our new reward system or new organizational chart. we actually have to develop new habits, new ways of thinking, what's below the water level. And that's where Toyota is focusing with their intense development of people. Years spent developing you as a leader. A 3-month training course for team leaders, and then on the job, they're being developed every day by the group leader. So what they're trying to factor ways of thinking, routine behavior that they want to become your default of how you operate, even under pressure. In short, the Toyota Way is not just a set of tools, it's not just a lean program, but rather a management system that starts with a long-term focus on satisfying customers, and lean processes are a way to deliver value to the customer. But there always are problems. There's always opportunity for improvement. There's always waste. So we need them to be continually improved by all team members at all levels of the company. At the center of the Toyota Way is scientific thinking, which is learning your way through uncertain territory when you don't know, toward big challenges. Toyota invests heavily in developing leaders who think scientifically, coach this way of thinking, and lead continuous improvement at all levels. The frontline leaders who run a work group can be viewed as the presidents of their work group, and they have a lot of responsibility, a lot of training, a lot of sophistication in delivering value and leading improvement. Scientific thinking, it turns out, is a good way to navigate, particularly when we don't know, when we're unsure, when we're uncertain, but it's not our default mode. Our default mode is fast thinking. Come up with the answer, implement it, and get it right for the first time. You can practice starter kata with some coaching to help rewire your brain to start to become more comfortable with slow thinking, more comfortable with scientific thinking. So it starts to become more natural as a go-to. You're still going to do a lot of fast thinking. You're not trying to replace all that, because there's things you know and there's things you have to react to quickly. But when you take on a big challenge, you want to be able to shift modes into your long-term scientific thinking mode. Any big change through PDCA requires daily Kaizen to refine, improve the details, and sustain. And to implement lean, we need to change culture, which requires learning by practice, by doing, with leaders as coaches. Telling people things, short training courses are not enough. So this is what Toyota is doing. I'm not saying that you can simply flip the switch and say, right now we're in command and control mode, we're reactive. We have a lot of turnover. We bring people in and quickly train them. We do a lot of correction rather than building in quality. And we want the quick answer for how by the end of the year, we're going to be like Toyota. That's just not going to happen. It's a long-term process. In the Toyota Way, I have a quote from Gary Convis, who I wrote the Toyota Way to Lean Leadership with, where I asked Gary, who was the president at that time of Toyota's biggest plant in the United States, in Kentucky. And I asked him, if you hired somebody from the outside that had leadership capability, you wanted to be a manager, how long would it take before you'd feel comfortable that they could operate in the Toyota Way without supervision? And he said, that would be a tough one. It's kind of hard for outsiders to learn this stuff, but I would say about 10 years. It would take about 10 years for them to really master the Toyota Way and be able to operate in that way naturally. I talked to another Toyota leader, a vice president, who said that for many years he had this card that described the Toyota Way behaviors, and he had it in his wallet, and he would refer to it every day. And at one day he left it in his car, and he was like reaching for it to look at it, and he sort of panicking. And he realized he got through most of the day without looking at it. And that day, he felt like he had graduated. He was now a Toyota Way leader. So good luck with your conference. Good luck I hope you enjoy reading my book in Slovenian, and hope you can put in practice some of the things that I'm trying to teach. Thank you for your time.